Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Dr. Hilary Justice, the Patrick and Carol T. Hemingway Scholar in Residence for the Ernest Hemingway Collection at the JFK Library. Because my position is funded by the JFK Library Foundation, the nonprofit organization that supports and partners with the JFK Presidential Library and Museum, my position is not federal, and thus I am able to be with you today despite the ongoing shutdown of the federal government as we celebrate this year's PEN Hemingway Award for debut novel. On behalf of all of us at what we collectively call the JFK, especially Library Director Alan Price and Foundation Executive Director Rachel Day Floor, I am delighted to welcome all of you to today's celebration. Because of the shutdown, whenever you see Alan in the program, I will be his understudy. I know that he and all of our federal colleagues wish they could be here today to welcome you and to join us in this afternoon's celebration of the 2025 winner and honorees. I would like to acknowledge all those who make this event possible, including the generous underwriters of the Kennedy Library Forums, lead sponsors Bank of America, the Lowell Institute, and CVS Health, as well as the Mass Cultural Council, and our media sponsor, the Boston Globe, and generous supporters who help us sustain the Hemingway Collection and its programs, especially the Hemingway family, Hemingway Limited, and our own Friends of the Hemingway Collection members. We're very pleased to be collaborating and co-presenting this afternoon's celebration in conjunction with the International Hemingway Foundation and Society. We are grateful, as always, to them for their partnership, as we are to PEN America for its work administering the awards, and to the distinguished judges for the 2025 awards. We're also very, very pleased to have members of the Hemingway family joining us today. This year, our hearts are especially full with the recent loss of Patrick Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway's son, who we lost in September at the age of 97. Since the very beginning of the JFK's official role as the steward of the Ernest Hemingway Collection in the 1970s, Patrick, along with his late wife Carol, supported our work not only materially, but especially with his wisdom and clear, very often quite frank advice. We miss them both tremendously, and our hearts have been and continue to be with his family. Carrying on Patrick's work are his nephew, Dr. Seán Hemingway, and his wife, Dr. Colette Hemingway. They're here today and are co-chairs of our Hemingway Council, which exists to raise awareness of and support for the Ernest Hemingway Collection and its programs. We are absolutely delighted to welcome them back to Boston today. It's lovely to see you every year. President Kennedy admired Ernest Hemingway and his work and cited Hemingway's definition of courage as grace under pressure in the beginning of his own Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Profiles in Courage. After Ernest Hemingway died in 1961, President Kennedy arranged for Mary Hemingway, Hemingway's widow, to return to Cuba. The relationship was a bit fraught at that point, to retrieve her late husband's belongings. A few years later, she offered Ernest Hemingway's papers, photographs, and selected mementos to Jacqueline Kennedy for inclusion in the late president's library. And so we are particularly honored and delighted to host this afternoon's program and carry on the legacy of both families and their indelible mark on American culture and society. As we further the Kennedy administration's legacy in honoring the arts and culture, we are grateful indeed for the opportunity to celebrate the work of this year's especially talented honorees. It's a powerful feeling that so many of us can be together this afternoon to show our appreciation of and commitment to the impact of the written word. And here I'm going to risk going off script for 20 seconds. I was thinking, as I was driving in this morning, what a labor of love this event is. Every single person in this room, from our judges to our photographer, to the Hemingways, to the Hemingway scholars who are joining us, to donors, members of the Kennedy family, and to all of my colleagues, whether they can be here working on this event today or whether they can't. This is a labor of love. Every single person who is part of this event, whether you know their names and faces or not, does something for the event because they have chosen to love something that is bigger than themselves. Whether it's the writers who are working alone, reaching for an audience they hope for, and in this case, have reached. Whether it's the scholars who have a cool idea about a Hemingway story. Or whether it's someone who pays such attention to detail that every punctuation mark on every piece of signage that helped get you here is correct. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the power of that kind of love. That love is why all of our paths are crossing for this one moment in Boston today. And I wanted to thank you all personally for having that kind of love in your heart and being willing to act on it. Now I'll go back on script. It is my pleasure to invite to the podium Ernest Hemingway's grandson, Seán. He will open today's celebration with a reading from his grandfather's work. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Seán Hemingway.
Thank you, Hillary. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you today. There's been a long-standing tradition to give Ernest Hemingway a voice at this event, and it is my honor to read to you now from his short story, Big Two-Hearted River. I chose this reading to honor my uncle, Patrick Hemingway, who loved this event and is deeply missed. My grandfather wrote the story in 1924. It is one of the Nick Adams stories and is set in Upper Michigan in the region where he grew up. This passage focuses on fishing the river for trout. Close your eyes for a few minutes and let my grandfather's words take you to that time and place. Big Two-Hearted River. Nick felt awkward and professionally happy with all his equipment hanging from him. The grasshopper bottle swung against his chest. In his shirt, the breast pockets bulged against him with the lunch and his flybook. He stepped into the stream. It was a shock. His trousers clung tight to his legs. His shoes felt the gravel. The water was a rising, cold shock. Rushing, the current sucked against his legs. Where he stepped in, the water was over his knees. He waded with the current. The gravel slid under his shoes. He looked down at the swirl of water below each leg and tipped up the bottle to get a grasshopper. The first grasshopper gave a jump in the neck of the bottle and went out into the water. He was sucked under in the whirl by Nick's right leg and came to the surface a little way downstream. He floated rapidly, kicking. In a quick circle, breaking the smooth surface of the water, he disappeared. A trout had taken him. Another hopper poked his face out of the bottle. His antennae wavered. He was getting his front legs out of the bottle to jump. Nick took him by the head and held him while he threaded the slim hook under his chin, down through his thorax, and into the last segments of his abdomen. The grasshopper took hold of the hook with his front feet, spitting tobacco juice on it. Nick dropped him into the water. Holding the rod in his right hand, he let out line against the pull of the grasshopper in the current. He stripped off from the reel with his left hand and let it run free. He could see the hopper in the little waves of the current. It went out of sight. There was a tug on the line. Nick pulled against the taut line. It was his first strike. Holding the now living rod across the current, he brought in the line with his left hand. The rod bent in jerks, the trout pumping against the current. Nick knew it was a small one. He lifted the rod straight up in the air. It bowed with the pull. He saw the trout in the water, jerking with his head and body against the shifting tangent of the line in the stream. Nick took the line in his left hand and pulled the trout, thumping tiredly against the current to the surface. His back was mottled the clear, water-over-gravel color, his side flashing in the sun. The rod under his right arm, Nick stooped, dipping his right hand into the current. He held the trout, never still, with his moist right hand, while he unhooked the barb from his mouth, then dropped him back into the stream. Thank you. I'd like to welcome Carl Eby, President of the Ernest Hemingway Foundation, to the podium. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Seán, so much. That's a lovely passage. I was just telling Seán, my son's a fly fishing guide, and being able to close my eyes and hear that passage was just like being in the water for a few minutes. It was just cooling, and I don't know, I felt transported. It's an amazing story, an amazing writing. It's always an honor to follow Seán, to follow anybody for the Hemingway family. They've contributed so much to the John F. Kennedy Library's Hemingway collection, which is just a remarkable, remarkable archive of documents. And so much to this award, too. I want to thank everyone also in the audience today, both here in person and also joining us online. So my name again, I'm Carl Eby. I'm president of the Ernest Hemingway Foundation and Society. The Hemingway Foundation was established in 1965 by Mary Hemingway, Ernest's widow, for the purposes of awakening, sustaining an interest in, promoting, fostering, stimulating, supporting, improving, and developing literature. Actually, I edited that. It's longer. It goes on. The Foundation and Society is proud to promote scholarship devoted to the life and work of Ernest Hemingway, and it's proud to support and promote new voices in contemporary American fiction, which of course is why we're here today. As part of that mission, I'm honored to be here to celebrate the Hemingway Award, which each year honors a debut novel of exceptional merit by an American author. For his extraordinary work, I'm delighted to congratulate this year's winner, Michael Deagler, and this year's finalists, Carl Legotsky, Vinita Blackburn, and Samuel Kalalue. I want to extend our deepest thanks to this year's award judges, Lauren Acampora, Allegra Goodman, and Akhil Sharma. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. I want to thank Alex George for agreeing to deliver today's keynote address. I'm grateful also for this opportunity to thank Seán and Colette Hemingway, the Hemingway family, the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation. In particular, I want to really give a shout out to Liz Murphy and to Hillary Justice for really amazing work to pull off today's event. And I think Hillary spoke beautifully about the labor of love that went into that. And I can just say, having seen them work on this all year to put together today's event, it really is a labor of love, and you see it in the work that they do. I also want to thank Caitlin Adelsberger and the UCross Foundation. They are marvelous partners with this award, and they provide a residency, writer's residency, to all of the finalists for the award, which is really marvelous of them. I want to thank PEN America. They have been our partners in administering this award for the last 6 years. And I'm delighted, really, truly delighted to announce that in 2026, we'll be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the PEN Hemingway Award and inaugurating a new partnership with the PEN Faulkner Foundation, which has assumed administrative duties for the PEN Hemingway Award. In addition to the PEN Faulkner Award and the PEN Hemingway Award, the PEN Faulkner Foundation also administers the PEN Malmet Award for excellence in the short story. Our missions coincide perfectly, and I'm delighted to usher in this new era for the PEN Hemingway Award. Please join me in welcoming to our family Gwydion Sullivan, Executive Director from the PEN Faulkner Foundation.
Well, I am so delighted to be here, and I'm going to take up as little of your time as possible because we're all here to hear from the writers, right? Not the administrators. For those of you who haven't been introduced to PEN Faulkner yet, we're most widely known for giving out the PEN Faulkner Award and the PEN Malmet Award for excellence in the short story, but our vision is actually bigger than that. Our mission is to champion the breadth and power of fiction in America. And frankly, it's a glorious and honorable and never-ending task that I'm proud to be a part of. It seems to get more and more important every day, and I know everyone in this room agrees. I know everyone in this room, I'm making eye contact with as many people as I can, you all believe in the power of fiction or you wouldn't be here. We are each other's people, right? We have found each other here in this room today, and that's an amazing thing we should all be grateful for. I want everyone to leave with one more friend than they had when they came here today, right? Let's be a community. Now, PEN Faulkner does have a long history of its own of recognizing major literary achievements. And that's why we are really humbled and honored to be taking on the task of administering this award moving forward. We intend to live up to the tradition that you all have established. Not only to live up to it, but to extend it. We take it seriously. It's been an honor to partner with Carl. I've worked pretty tirelessly to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And I think you're going to be excited very soon. The time will pass, and we'll have a new list of, a long list, and a new list of finalists, and a new winner. And I'm proud of the work we're putting in now to make that happen. I have immense gratitude for the Hemingway Foundation and Society, for the Hemingway family, for the JFK Library and Museum, for the JFK Foundation. You've entrusted us with a responsibility that we take very seriously. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Gwydion. Before turning things over, I want to say a word more about this year's award judges. Really, it's something to think about the process of judging an award of this magnitude, of this importance. The hundreds of novels that have to get read, really, from the depths of my heart, I want to thank Lauren Acampora, Allegra Goodman, and Akhil Sharma. Akhil, by the way, who could not be with us here today, is a former winner of the PEN Hemingway Award. And this speaks to the quality of these judges, really distinguished writers, all really noted writers. They've generously dedicated an enormous amount of time and energy to the task of reading the many incredible, diverse debut novels that were published last year. I just can't thank them enough. We're glad to have Lauren Acampora and Allegra Goodman with us here today. Let me turn things over to Lauren to help us celebrate this year's outstanding honorees.
Thank you so much. I can't believe it's been a year since this process began, and it's time for the next crew. It's been a journey. being a judge. But first, just an incredible, incredible honor, and I'm so pleased to be in this room with all of you, and fellow judges and authors and supporters. Being a judge for this award, hundreds of books. Let me just say, I grew up as an only child, so that means I read a lot in the corner, in my bedroom, in the tree, under blankets with a flashlight. I read a lot, diversely, widely, voraciously. So the idea, if you had told the younger me I would someday have the opportunity to judge a book award, I wouldn't have believed it. What an incredible dream. But the reality, it was even better than that. It was even better than that. It was just incredibly exciting to be given a bird's eye view of the literary landscape at this moment in time, what's being published. Brand new authors, not all new, some are story writers trying their first novels, but new voices, new to me, in I believe all cases. What's on their minds at this moment? What are people writing about? What do they care about? And to have that perspective on American literature at this moment was really a privilege. And very quickly I saw not only are these books incredibly diverse, really varied, the voices, the geography, the presses that were putting them out, but I started noticing recurring patterns and themes. It was very, very interesting. I was telling some people about that. So I'm not sure, I may have to write a paper about what this means. So the first thing that I did was I made a huge error as a judge, which is that I said, I don't like reading on a computer screen, so I requested physical copies of the books. And then they started arriving on my porch every day, and my family is like, what are we gonna do with all of these books? So there was a mountain in the corner of the living room, this toppling mountain of books. So very quickly I regretted that choice, but yeah, way too many, but they were anyway, and then the actual evaluation, of course, of the books and the ranking of the books. I mean, to compare novels is folly. It's crazy. They're all so different. I mean, apples and oranges and bananas and pears, and it was absurdly difficult, really agonizing to do it, and I'm eternally grateful to my fellow judges, Allegra and Akil, who kept their cool throughout it all and have immaculate taste and discernment. I did not keep my cool whatsoever. I was completely just preoccupied by the process for months on end, and thank God for Akil and Allegra to help with this process. And we did eventually miraculously come to agreement. I still can't believe it. I mean, how does that happen? So there was some serendipity, something descended on us, and we all agreed at the end on the long list, on the short list. And yeah, we did it. One interesting point I just want to quickly note, and then I'll get to it, is how many of the novels that stood out to us and made it onto the long list and ultimately the short list and even the winner were published by small presses. And I just want to take a moment to shout out to the small presses. These are publishers who are really taking risks. They're taking chances, I think, on voices that don't adhere to what's popular at the moment, what kinds of stories, the kinds of perspectives that have been shown to sell, that are eminently marketable at the moment. They don't follow a trodden path that you can. This really stood out. The freshest books, the ones that really just grabbed me right away, I noticed were almost, with a few exceptions, were those tiny presses. Some of presses I've never even heard of. I think there were 2 University of Iowa books on the long list. And Astra Press I had never heard of before, Sunbury never heard of. You know, it was really an education for me in the small presses that are doing amazing work at this moment. Okay. And I'd also just like to take one more moment to acknowledge the publishers of all of the Hemingway honorees, just for recognizing real art, real talent, reminding what fiction is for: to delight, to rattle, to surprise, and to illuminate the human experience. And thanks to the Hemingway Foundation and Society for making this special event happen, despite the challenges. Thank you, Liz. And finally, thank you to the authors themselves for creating these wonderful novels to begin with, for persevering through the roadblocks and all of the doubts, both external and internal, which all authors know about, who held fast to the belief in the power of stories and got theirs into our hands against all odds. Those first novels, man, they're not easy to get out into the world, as we all know. Congratulations. Enjoy UCross. It's a really cool residency. I think you're going to love it. All right, so without further ado, first I'd like to just say a few words about Venita Blackburn, who sadly is not here. She lives out in LA, so I don't blame her. But her book, Dead in Long Beach, California, the story of a woman who, blindsided by her brother's suicide, finds herself impersonating him through text messages, conjuring for him a kind of extended existence. It's a novel unlike any of the others that these judges read for this award. In fact, not like any novel I've ever personally read. This is really an audaciously inventive work of fiction, creating a funhouse reflection of the fragmented, disorienting, disassociating experience of grief. Venita Blackburn writes with poetry and precision, and all the judges agreed that she's a dynamo with a thrilling future. Hi, Venita, if you're watching. Congratulations. Okay, and Karol Łogotzki, Controlled Conversations. Controlled Conversations takes place in a small town in Soviet-controlled Poland, populated by deeply dimensional and indelible characters, entrapped in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. In this suspenseful novel, that's also quirky and funny in many parts, Karol Łogotzki delivers a wildly entertaining, expertly controlled story with deft pacing and a stylish structure, as well as a profound portrayal of shared suffering, the risks of both resistance and submission to autocracy, and the human drive for freedom at all costs, ultimately concluding on a note of hope. I know Karol is working on a number of other pieces of fiction, and I can't wait to see what's next. So I'd like to welcome him to come on up and read a little bit of Controlled Conversations.
Well, thank you, everyone, for coming here, for joining us for this celebration. And I'd like to say thank you to the Hemingway Foundation. Thank you for this incredible honor. And many thanks to the JFK Library Foundation for having us and for being such gracious hosts. As Lauren mentioned, this is a small press book, and I wouldn't be here if not for small presses being willing to take risks on us. It's never found an agent, never found a big five publisher, and it's here. So without further ado, I'll read from the first chapter, through the middle of it. And the reading or the fragment starts at the very moment that martial law in Poland starts in 1981. The night shift on December 13th, 1981, ended hours past the 6 a.m. quitting time. A few minutes after midnight, two uniformed Milicja Obywatelska policemen, accompanied by a few armed soldiers in fatigues, walked into the telephone station and ordered Emilia and Frania Nowak, the only two women on the shift, off their headpieces and to their feet. Emilia held Frania's shoulder, as her shiftmate seemed to have trouble breathing. Pani Frania could have been no more than 15 years her senior, but as soon as Emilia met the woman for the first time, she sensed in her a frailty that couldn't be explained by age. Now they hobbled to the opposite wall and stood under the searching eyes of the men and the sharp, naked neon light that for the first time made Emilia shiver. One of the militia uniforms silently prodded a young, skinny soldier, the only one with a bar of rank on his chicken chest. Nothing to worry about, the boy said, stumbling forward. He fixed the AK-47 on his shoulder, then fingered the gigantic knob of a nose and exhaled. Emilia wondered if the gun's strap had left a bruise against the bone. Her urge to stare oscillated between the rifle and the nose. She could think of nothing to say. The boy swallowed, glanced back, and remained silent. The man who seemed to be in charge bobbed his head down and back up in a clear mix of irritation and resignation, and took off his hat and scratched the flaking skin on top of his bald pate. He walked up to the console wall and stared at the row of plugs, lights, and sockets. With a sigh, he dropped into the swivel chair and spun to face the room. All telephone communication has been suspended. No phone, no telegram, telex, whatnot. As of, he glanced at his watch, 15 minutes ago, we're under martial law. Martial law? Emilia didn't know if she asked about what that meant or what exactly happened, but she was glad to get some words past her throat. How was it that she had never met the sweaty, bald man before? Zygmuntowo was a small enough town that she should have known all the local militia, the patrolmen, the 6 men on the traffic detail, and all the other uniforms. The other man looked familiar. His shifting feet told her he'd much rather be somewhere else, but his name escaped her. All telephone stations are getting little visits right about now, the bald man said, then gave a wry smirk. Lucky me, I got to come all the way to this dump. Let's go. In short order, the militia and the soldiers herded Emilia and Frania upstairs and into the administrative office. The janitor and the boilerman were already sitting on the floor in the middle of the room under the guard of 2 uniformed boys with guns. The main militia man pointed to the floor, and Emilia complied. His gaze fixed her down and moved on to the others. With a nod to the soldiers, he turned and left the room, followed by the local man in a steel blue uniform. The soldier who had tried to comfort them slouched, then sank to a crouch with his back against the wall, his gun held between the knees. He gestured around, and the other boys followed the example. Let us know if you need anything, he addressed Emilia and Frania. We have no food, but if you want some tea, we could make it in the kitchenette. Tea would be nice, Emilia smiled. Tea would be nice. Emilia smiled at the boy. He smiled back. She decided he wasn't as young as she had thought now that most of the fear had fled him, perhaps even approaching her age. He sent 4 of the other men to the kitchenette, and when they returned, they carried enough cups to go around. Emilia sipped her tea, back to back with Frania, next to the janitor and the boilerman, and surrounded by 6 soldiers with automatic rifles, each resting against the wall. All she could hear for a time was sipping. A faint mechanical scent, like freshly oiled door hinges, rose in the room. Probably the guns. What's happening? Emilia heard Frania say. I've got children at home. The woman's first words since the soldiers barged in barely shook. Emilia sought Frania's hand, squeezed and held. Martial law, the soldier in charge said. Służba bezpieczeństwa and the military have taken over. They've put lots of people in prison. I don't know how many. Thousands. That's what the bold Bezpieka major said. Wałęsa and all the Solidarity brass, and Gierek, Jaroszewicz, and a bunch of the old apparatchiks too, for good measure. We're under curfew now, until the morning. The major came from Gdańsk with orders. But he's wearing a militia uniform, Emilia said. Uzbeks wear what they want. I saw his ID, definitely from the security service. But I don't know if the name was real. Stelmach or some such. What is your name? Emilia asked. Marek, she said. Marek. Emilia, she said. Behind me, that's Pani Frania. She smiled and worked on deciding how much that nose bothered her. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to revisit these books and hear them in the authors' voices. Okay. In Road to the Salt Sea, Samuel Kolawole gives us the incredible story of Abel God, a Nigerian man whose association with a crime makes it impossible for him to remain in the country. His treacherous journey overland and overseas toward Europe is a literary gut punch, visceral and eye-opening. The heat and desperation of Abel God's journey feels intimate, physical, and immediate. Through this flawed but powerfully defiant character and those he meets along the way, the reader too experiences the fight for survival and the pain of moral compromise, and the push and pull of hope and delusion. The novel is raw, honest, and propulsive, serving as a searing window into the migrant experience. I'm so glad I had the privilege of reading it and honoring Sam today. Okay.
Thank you. I hope I can see without my glasses. I broke it, so I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'd like to appreciate the PEN America and Ernest Hemingway Foundation for this great honor. I also like to appreciate my fellow honorees and especially Michael. Congratulations. I'll read from chapter 24. I'll just do something very short. Nothing had prepared Abel God for the Sahara, not even Agadez with its dry and dusty winds. They left Agadez for the everlasting sand, blasted past the airstrips, and passed through the only police checkpoint in the area. Abel God summoned up childhood memories of the Sahara he had seen on TV. He imagined the silk tents as they drove past tattered half-colored shelters. He imagined distant oases with sparkling ponds bordered by green palm trees. But the burning sun soon overtook him and evaporated all thoughts and imagination from his head. Arid grassland, rocky hills, and plateaus faded into gravel plains and sand dunes. One moment, he saw a herd of goats prodded onward by young boys. The next, it was a sea of emptiness. The temperature soared while it radiated from the ground, leaking up the moisture in the air and shimmering on the horizon in a silvery haze. Even the breeze was hot. Abel God felt sweat pouring down his face, blurring his vision, a mighty headed brew behind his forehead, spreading in both intensity and reach. After a while, the dry air teased the remaining moisture from his body. His skin dried up, as though his pores could no longer produce sweat. He could feel every part of his body itch as his skin crackled in the dry air. Soon the saliva dried up in his mouth, and there was nothing to moisten his tongue or his parched lips. He exhaled hot air, his throat scorching with heavy breath. He looked at the sullen Muslim-wrapped faces surrounding him. He rarely exchanged words with the people stuffed in with him in the pickup. Words were expensive. They all battled their own discomforts, trying to conserve their bodily fluids. His eyes fell on a quiet boy. Under his hoodie was a smudged and frowning face. His eyes looked strangely melancholic, as if he were longing for something unknown. Peeling his gaze away, Able God opened his jerry can and took a miserly sip from it. The water was warm by then, but it sent a refreshing jolt through his body anyway. His body ached for more, but he could not afford to drink more. He put the cap back on. That was when he noticed the quiet boy had been watching him. Able God saw that the boy's jerry can was empty and for a moment felt drawn to share some of his with him, but decided against it. He could share later if they made it, but not now. He looked away. Hot sand beats against their pickup with a sound like heavy rain as they barreled through the golden dunes and bumped over barren rock. A time came when they spoke up, grumbled about the chassis becoming too hot to sit on. One person suggested they pad their seats, so they carefully removed a few layers of their cloth head coverings. That created a new problem. Their faces were exposed to the desert's unforgiving elements. Dust filled their ears and noses and reddened their eyes, provoking bouts of coughing and shortness of breath. After 9 hours in the heat, Able God's tongue had shriveled in his throat. He wanted to strip bare, but he couldn't. His skin was caked with dust, even where he had kept himself covered. He could hear expressions of exhaustion rising from the boy next to him, the rasping of their breath and the sound of their clothes flapping in the wind. Terrible smells wafted from their shriveled lips. Some of those lips moved in prayer until they were too tired to move. Further requests were made to God were offered in the realm of the mind for those who could still think clearly. The quiet boy was sobbing on the shoulders of another passenger. There was nothing to hold on to, no hope, no newfangled dreams, no bitterness, no memory of love, nothing but the instinct to survive. Able God was grateful for every breath he drew, every hour that ticked by. His concern was not about the future, but surviving the next moment. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. That scene is unforgettable. I remember it really well, like I just read it. Okay. Michael Deagler's Early Sobrieties is an exquisitely honest, humorous, and poignant depiction of life on the far side of addiction. Its hero, Dennis Monk, 7 months sober at the start of the book, finds temporary shelter on the guest beds and couches of Philadelphia while seeking a foothold in the young adulthood that's been passing him by. The novel's episodic structure mirrors his halting journey toward purpose as he navigates the city's layered landscape of grit and gentrification, populated by vivid players and ghosts from his past. With understated lyrical elegance, Deagler conveys the exhilaration and disorientation of emerging from darkness to a world scrubbed bright and new. This uniquely sustained portrait of recovery, all of its tedium shot through with moments of glittering transcendence, lays bare universal human truths, the existential absurdity of accumulating time, the beautiful terror of each blank day, and the raw miracle of being alive. It's my great pleasure to see this book receive the honor it deserves and to welcome Mike. Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much to PEN America and the Hemingway Foundation and the JFK Library, and for the judges, Lauren and Allegra and Akil. This is truly the highlight of my professional career, and very personally, very satisfying also. And I just want to say what an honor it is to have my book considered alongside Venetia and Carol and Samuel, who wrote incredible novels that are so wise and funny and devastating. It's very humbling to be included in this group. So yeah, I'm just going to read a little bit of from the back half of the book. I don't think you really need to know anything beyond what Lauren just said. News of my sobriety had spread throughout the land, at least among a certain subset of individuals for whom sobriety was a rare and ill-considered state. It was Oktoberfest at the Brow House, which, in the name of public merriment, had shut down a block of South Street in order to validate a lot of debased and antisocial behavior. Not that such conduct didn't occur nightly on South Street, but the Brow House had welcomed it into the reputable light of day, to the accompaniment of Schlager and Volksmusik, no less, which surely represented, if not an act of outright delinquency, at least some form of civic negligence. I came for a soft pretzel and to reaffirm my own constructive life choices. Philadelphia was a small town when you got down to it, particularly if you sifted out those people for whom the Brow House Oktoberfest held little appeal. I ran into a number of acquaintances. Katie Doran was working the pretzel stand, and I imagine she mentioned my presence to Lila Noth in the beer tent, who likely tipped off Rob Gill and his troupe of inebriates, who accosted me outside the vegan cafe from which I was contemplating the purchase of a bubble tea. Gill had Sean Culp with him, and Sean Porth, and between the two of them they carried Mildew Hanafi like the crucified Christ, buttressing his slack, skinny arms with their shoulders. They cast the drunk man at me, repeating my name as though they believed it held incantatory properties. Dennis Monk, Dennis Monk, Dennis Monk. What? I said. The lax face of Hanafi was pressed against my shirt. His flaccid limbs draped themselves around my neck. He's overserved, cried Gill. Gill, too, was overserved. The whole group of them was overserved. They continued to overserve themselves from plastic beer steins germinating from their hands. You're sober, Dennis Monk. You need to take him home. Is that Dennis Monk? Muttered Hanafi. I know Dennis Monk. I don't know where he lives, I said, turning my face away from the semi-conscious reveler nuzzling at my sternum. He smelled strongly of beer and slightly of vomit. I knew very little about Hanafi. He was around 22, on the shorter end of average height, with elfin features that suggested intoxication even when he was sober, which he rarely was. I'd only ever encountered him in low-lit bars, where the regulars evolved a sort of cave blindness toward one another. I was alarmed to see him in daylight. He lives way down Passyunk. Gill had sardine eyes terrified of ever missing a thing that happened in the world. Down past 19th. I'm not going to take him there, I said. I don't even have a car. Just put him on a bench for a while. He'll get sunstroke and die, wailed Gill. He'll putrefy like a jack-o'-lantern. Jesus, just put him in the shade, I said, though already the old guilt was revving in my chest. I wanted nothing to do with the chemically impaired. They annoyed the fuck out of me, in a way that only those exhibiting my own inadequacies could. But for the same reason, I felt an obligation toward them. They brought to mind all the people who had aided me when I had been in similar states of degeneration. All the people, too, who hadn't bothered. Part of what impelled a person to substance abuse in the first place was the hope that, if he forfeited his faculties and lay himself before the mercy of his fellow man, some reluctant Samaritan might come along and look after him for a little while. I had once wobbled so discomfitingly before a bar in Callow Hill that a woman invited me into her car and dropped me off at a friend's place in Fairmount, asking nothing of me other than a promise that I would go straight to bed and take better care of myself in the future. Another time, a group of college students 5 years my junior, not one of whom I'd met before or since, bought me a late-night donut in Old City before sticking me in a cab bound for an address I knew in Northern Liberties. One time I stayed on the blue line long past my stop, all the way to Upper Darby, just to prove to a girlfriend that I was as proud as I was angry, as I was drunk, as I was baffled by my life, only to get mugged outside the 69th Street station and stumble back to her doorstep, 35 shameful blocks on foot, without receiving a single look of human recognition from a single person who crossed my path. For all of that, the people who'd helped and the ones who hadn't, I agreed to get Mildew Hanafi to his bed, even though I didn't want to. He'd become me, there in my arms, and I was someone else. Hooray, cheered the inebriates, Gill and Culp and Porth and all of them, like I had solved something permanent in their lives. Hooray for Dennis Monk. Thank you.
Wow, I'm speechless, which is unfortunate because I have to say the next words. Gentlemen, I want to thank you all for the honor of listening to your writing and your words, your voices, your creativity. It was incredibly moving and very powerful, and you've gifted all of us here today. Thank you. And if you could join me in a round of applause. It's now my honor to introduce today's keynote speaker. Alex George is a writer, a bookseller, a director of a literary festival, an educator, and a lawyer. He was born in England but presently lives in Boston. His novel, A Good American, was published by Amy Einhorn Books, an imprint of Penguin Putnam, in February 2012. It was a #1 Indie Next pick, a Barnes & Noble Discover New Writers pick, an Amazon Best Book of the Month, a Midwest Connections pick, and a Library Journal Best Book of the Year. It was a national and international bestseller. Setting Free the Kites was published in 2017, also by Penguin. It was an Indie Next pick, a Barnes & Noble Best Fiction pick, a Library Reads Choice, and a Midwest Connection pick. It also won the Missouri Prize for Fiction in 2018. And his novel, The Paris Hours, was published by Flatiron Books, an imprint of Macmillan, in 2020. It was an Indie Next pick, a Book of the Month selection, and an Amazon Best Book of the Month, and it was an instant national bestseller. In addition to his novels, Alex's work has appeared in the Washington Post, Literary Hub, and numerous other publications. Alex read law at Oxford University and worked for 8 years as a corporate lawyer in London and Paris. He moved to the United States in 2003. In addition to writing, he owns an independent bookshop, Skylark Bookshop, in downtown Columbia, Missouri. And that's not my phone. Whew. He is also the founder and director of the Unbound Book Festival, past guests of which have included Michael Ondaatje, Salman Rushdie, Zadie Smith, and George Saunders. He is also, in his spare time, a practicing attorney. He has been named as one of Britain's top 10 30-something novelists by the Times of London and was also named as the Independent on Sunday's Face to Watch for Fiction in its Fresh Talent feature. And herein lies my biggest challenge today. I get to pronounce a last name that I insist should be Socrates, but I am assured that it is not. Alex is married to the writer, professor, and critic, Alexandra Socharides. They live in Boston with their 4 children. Please join me in welcoming today's keynote, Alex George.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for those kind words of introduction. It is such an honor to be here this afternoon to help celebrate these extraordinary writers and their work. And my warmest congratulations to Michael and the other 3 finalists of this year's PEN Hemingway Award. What an extraordinary legacy you have become part of. The roster of winners and finalists for this prestigious prize over almost 50 years is a dazzling kaleidoscope of talent. Writers who, since those acclaimed debuts, have become bywords for literary excellence and whose novels grace civilized bookshelves the world over. and I look forward to watching your careers follow the same trajectory. And how apt that this award that celebrates the most exciting new talent also honors Ernest Hemingway. His words have been with us for a long time now, of course, but just as we're excited and astonished by these brilliant new voices, there remains something exquisitely, unendingly fresh about the pared-down sensibility of Hemingway's novels, the beautiful, brutal brevity of his stories. But when I think of Ernest Hemingway, I think more than anything of his unwavering dedication to the craft of writing. Open a movable feast to almost any page, and you will encounter a man who lives and breathes for the stories he must write. Read a paragraph of The Sun Also Rises, or a few lines from A Clean, Well-Lighted Place, and you enjoy the fruits of that uncompromising commitment to his art. I mention a movable feast because when I think of Ernest Hemingway, I tend to think of him in Paris. And it's a place I know well. I went to school there when I was 13, and I worked as a corporate attorney there when I was in my 20s. And as Hilary was kind enough to mention, my last novel was called The Paris Hours. The book takes place over the course of a single day in Paris in 1927, and due in no small part to my enthusiasm for A Movable Feast, Ernest Hemingway makes a couple of cameo appearances. He squabbles and bickers with Gertrude Stein, he dances with Josephine Baker, and he drinks quite a lot with John Dos Passos. I enjoyed my time with him very much. As part of my research for that novel, I read a number of Hemingway biographies, most of which weighed about as much as a small dog. And much as I enjoyed reading about Hemingway the man, my allegiance will always be to Hemingway the writer, in particular that unyielding dedication to the page. Like all writers, I have many demands on my time, and it can be all too easy to be distracted by those other commitments. And that's when I like to think of Ernest Hemingway, who I suspect would have little patience or indeed sympathy for such a conundrum. Above my desk, there is a little sign that I have crafted for myself, and it reads simply, WWED. What would Ernest do? And I think the answer, as we all know, is right. As you can probably tell from my accent, for more than 20 years, I lived in Missouri. While I was there, I ran my own law firm, published a few novels, founded a literary festival, which is now in its 11th year, and opened an independent bookstore. I had a good time. Last year, my wife and I moved to Boston, and I'm thrilled to be here. I know I don't need to tell you any of this, but this is one of the most wonderful things about the city, is its extraordinary literary community. There are so many wonderful authors, bookshops, and writing communities, big and small. For example, last weekend was the Boston Book Festival, when I had the privilege of moderating a panel featuring Susan Choi, Gish Jen, and a past Hemingway Award winner, Jennifer Haig. That is an awful lot of star power in one room, but it was just one of scores of similar events going on last Saturday. And of course, there are wonderful celebrations like this one. I miss my bookshop terribly, but this helps. But back to Missouri. It's a state, of course, that Ernest Hemingway knew well, especially Kansas City, although I don't know how much of it he would recognize today. My bookshop, Skylark, is in Columbia, slap bang in the middle of the state, equidistant between Kansas City and St. Louis. And like hundreds of other bookstores across the country, we celebrate banned books. Unfortunately, we do not do this only during Banned Books Week, but all year round. And the reason for this is that Missouri is home to some school boards who are among the most enthusiastic banners of books anywhere in the country. I have spoken with LGBTQ authors of kids and YA books whose livelihoods have been devastated by these kinds of embargoes. Their titles are no longer on the shelves of school media centers. They are no longer invited to come and speak to the students. Now, many educators and librarians and administrators have taken strong and defiant stances against this kind of thing, even, or perhaps especially, in Missouri. Unfortunately, though, this year, the United States Supreme Court has just made their struggle significantly more difficult. So with your indulgence, I'm going to put on my attorney hat for just a moment and tell you about a case called Mahmood versus Taylor. Before I do that, a brief digression. I was first invited to give these remarks in early January of this year. The presidential election was over, but the second Trump administration was yet to begin. It feels like another world. I fear that the last 9 months and those that follow will be some of the most damagingly consequential of this country's imperfect and complicated history. I became a citizen of the United States in 2012, in the same week, fittingly enough, that my novel that celebrated immigration into America was published. I am an immigrant. I have chosen to make my life here. It is an honor and a privilege to have done so. I love this country, even as my heart breaks for it. And when I was contemplating what to say this afternoon, I understood that I could not turn away from all this. I am a writer after all. My instinct is to meet the moment and to reflect in some small way the world that I see before me. So, to Mahmood versus Taylor. In November 2022, the Montgomery County Board of Education in Maryland approved several LGBTQ inclusive children's books as supplemental curriculum for its elementary school language arts program. Initially, parents were given the ability to opt out of classes featuring those books, but this approach was stopped when it became too burdensome for the school administrators. 3 sets of parents from Muslim, Roman Catholic, and Ukrainian Orthodox families sued the school board, demanding the reinstatement of the opt-out and alleging that such books violated the free exercise clause of the First Amendment, which protects individuals' rights to practice their religion without government interference. The far-right supermajority of the Supreme Court agreed with the parents. I will spare you the wackadoodle legal reasoning which the 6 justices had to resort to in order to reach this conclusion. Safe to point out that exposure is not the same as indoctrination. In her defiant dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote, "Simply being exposed to beliefs contrary to your own does not amount to prohibiting the free exercise of religion." Or, as the Authors Guild pointed out in an amicus brief in the case, reading the Communist Manifesto does not require one to become a Marxist. But questionable legal analysis by the Roberts Court to get to the desired political result is no longer news. It's kind of their thing. But what really matters in Mahmood are the consequences. Because of the impossible burden that opt-out procedures would impose, schools are more likely to remove potentially problematic books entirely. The result, in other words, will be widespread censorship, dramatically limiting the literature available to all students. And needless to say, if students or their parents can opt out of reading certain titles, this would generate social stigma against LGBTQ+ students and their families. Justice Sotomayor wrote that the decision in Mahmood, quote, strikes at the core premise of public schools, that children may come together to learn not the teachings of a particular faith, but a range of concepts and views that reflect our entire society. Exposure to new ideas has always been a vital part of that project until now. The effect of the case, in other words, is to undermine America's pluralistic values. And this is a problem because, thanks to the chronic polarization that we have all been witness to, the sorry causes of which I do not need to enumerate here, those values have already taken a battering. All that Mahmood will do is to deepen the existing fissures in our society even further. Now, the case is decided. The law has changed. In the short term, at least, we have to live with this new reality. But that doesn't mean that we are without power to do anything. We have agency still. We can choose how to respond both to this decision and to the more widespread problem of polarization. And this, my friends, is where literature comes in. In 1821, Percy Shelley, a poet of whom I'm very fond for Skylark-related reasons, wrote in A Defense of Poetry, quote, "A man to be greatly good must imagine intensely and comprehensively. He must put himself in the place of another and of many others. The pains and pleasures of his species must become his own. The great instrument of moral good is the imagination, and poetry administers to the effect by acting upon the cause. But perhaps putting oneself in the place of another and of many others is easier said than done these days. The novelist Rachel Kaddish wrote a piece in the New York Times last year called "The Most Important Writing Exercise I've Ever Assigned." She asks her students to write down a phrase that they find abhorrent, something that they would never dream of saying themselves. Even this can prove a challenge for some, but then she pushes them further. She asks her students to write a monologue spoken by a fictitious character that includes the objectionable statement. In other words, they must adopt the voice of someone whose opinions they find repugnant. Finally, in that monologue, there must be a moment where the reader feels empathy for the speaker. Kaddish has been teaching a version of this exercise for over 2 decades, but she reports that recently, as we have become more polarized, her students seem more reluctant to engage in that last empathetic leap. People have become increasingly unwilling to occupy the shoes of someone they find repellent. And this may not be easy work, but it is necessary. The unflinching empathy that Kaddish believes can be developed through this exercise is a critical skill to help us navigate our way through our current predicament. Without empathy, we risk yet more dehumanization of those with whom we don't agree. Without empathy, compromise becomes infinitely harder. Without empathy, the instinct for forgiveness is replaced by a desire for retribution. If Percy Shelley is right, and the great instrument of moral good is the imagination, then let us imagine. Let us engage with the world with Rachel Kaddish's unflinching empathy. Let us, in other words, do the opposite of the Supreme Court in Mahmoud versus Taylor. Let us narrow the gaps that exist between us, not make them wider. And look, I know that things seem bleak right now, but I'm reminded of the words of the Czech playwright and political leader Václav Havel. He said, quote, "I have few illusions, but I feel a responsibility to work towards the things I consider good and right. I don't know whether I'll be able to change certain things for the better or not at all. Both outcomes are possible. There is only one thing I will not concede, that it might be meaningless to strive in a good cause. So, let us strive." I have, with apologies to Jonathan Swift, a modest proposal. It is simply this: let us imagine. Let us act always with empathy and always with kindness, and let us stay the course. Let authors keep on writing books and telling their truths. Let booksellers, heroes, every one of them, continue to curate their inventory to reflect and represent the richness and diversity of their communities. Let librarians make their resources available for all and fight back against the forces who would have us all a little dumber and a little more compliant. There are few things more ferocious than an angry librarian. Let teachers continue to teach. Let them, as Colin McCann puts it so beautifully, guide their students toward the fire. And let's start small. Let's go into our communities and do the work there. Let's go to readings. Let's attend festivals. Let's lift up the voices that need to be heard. And let's turn away from the cynics and the haters. And readers will read. And with luck, they'll shop in real bookshops. Let's turn away from dark algorithms. Let's browse the shelves and make our own delightful discoveries. And let us always, always read debut novels, because, amazingly, there are always so many fabulous new ones to enjoy. Thank you very much.
Alex, thank you. I would like to thank you for your vulnerability and your love and your passion, the same way I would like to celebrate everyone's vulnerability. And after today, I don't know about the rest of you, but mine feels just a little bit stronger. This concludes today's celebration of the 2025 PEN Hemingway Awards. On behalf of my colleagues from the John F. Kennedy Library, the JFK Library Foundation, the Ernest Hemingway Foundation, and Society, thank you all for coming. In the words of Garrison Keillor, go forth, do good work, and keep in touch. Thank you.